All right, today we are diving deep, and I mean deep, into the fascinating world of endocrine pathophysiology. We're going to be talking about the body's master regulators, the hormones, and really unpack what happens when those delicate, intricate control systems go off the rails. You know, if you've ever really wanted to understand the why behind major endocrine diseases, from your thyroid all the way down to your adrenals, this is where we're going to connect all those dots. Okay, let's get right into it. So here's our game plan for this session. We're going to kick things off with the thyroid, getting into its essential hormones and the major diseases that can affect it. From there, we'll pivot over to the super powerful regulation of cortisol and prolactin. Then we'll tackle a really critical group of hormones from the pancreas, the GI tract, and the adrenals, before we tie it all together with the clinical disorders of cortisol, prolactin, and, to wrap it all up, aldosterone.
So let's start at the very foundation, the thyroid gland itself. You know, really understanding its main hormones, T3 and T4, and how they are so precisely controlled is absolutely critical before we can even begin to make sense of the pathology.
Okay, so the thyroid makes two key hormones. First, you've got thyroxine, or T4. It makes up about 90% of what the gland pumps out. But you should think of T4 as the stable reserve player on the bench. It's mostly a pro-hormone just waiting to be activated. The real MVP, the star of the show, is triiodothyronine, or T3. It's secreted in much, much smaller amounts, but it is way more potent. It's the active form that really gets the job done. Together, these two act as the body's metabolic throttle, regulating everything from our core temperature and energy use to our growth and development.
Now, this is where it gets really cool. This is the elegant control system we call the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid, or HPT axis. It's a classic, just beautiful feedback loop. It all starts up top, with the hypothalamus releasing TRH, which is thyrotropin-releasing hormone. That TRH then travels down and tells the pituitary gland to secrete TSH, thyroid-stimulating hormone. TSH, like its name says, goes to the thyroid and tells it, hey, release T3 and T4. And here's the absolute genius part. As T3 and T4 levels rise in the blood, they feed back and hit the brakes on both the hypothalamus and the pituitary, shutting down TRH and TSH. This negative feedback is what keeps the entire system in this perfect homeostatic balance.
So what happens when this perfectly tuned axis breaks down? Well, that's exactly where we get into the pathophysiology. Whether the communication in the axis gets scrambled or the gland itself comes under attack, the result is significant and often really systemic thyroid disease. Let's look at three really critical thyroid conditions here. In Graves' disease, the immune system basically goes rogue. It creates these antibodies that, instead of attacking something, they actually mimic TSH. So they're just constantly slamming the accelerator on the TSH receptor, causing this massive overproduction of thyroid hormone. Now, in sharp contrast, you have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. This is the opposite autoimmune story. Here, the antibodies and T cells are actively destroying thyroid tissue, basically slamming the brakes on hormone production. And then you have thyroid storm. This isn't a chronic disease, it's an acute, life-threatening crisis where a massive, uncontrolled flood of thyroid hormones is just dumped into the system. So these conditions lead to the two fundamental states of thyroid trouble. You have hypothyroidism, which is most often caused by Hashimoto's. It's a state of hormone deficiency that just slows the body's entire metabolism down to a crawl. And then you have hyperthyroidism, typically from Graves' disease, which is the polar opposite, a state of hormone excess that dangerously revs the metabolism into complete overdrive. Diving into the clinical picture for hypothyroidism, the why is pretty straightforward. Low T3 and T4 levels just slow everything down. This shows up as a classic group of symptoms. You've got persistent fatigue, feeling cold when everyone else is fine, unexplained weight gain, constipation, a slow heart rate, that's bradycardia, plus physical signs like dry skin and even hair loss. Diagnostically, the lab work tells the whole story. You're going to see an elevated TSH because the pituitary is basically screaming at the failing thyroid to work harder, combined with low levels of the active hormone, free T4. And now for the flip side, hyperthyroidism. Here, those rogue TSH receptor antibodies are just relentlessly stimulating T3 and T4 production, cranking the metabolic rate up to the absolute max. And the clinical presentation? It's almost a perfect mirror image of hypothyroidism. You see unintended weight loss, even with a huge appetite, heat intolerance, a racing heart or tachycardia, a tremor, anxiety, and palpitations. A goiter, which is a visibly enlarged thyroid, is also super common. The diagnosis is confirmed with labs that show a virtually undetectable, suppressed TSH. The pituitary has slammed on the brakes, trying to stop the runaway gland, along with high levels of free T4 and T3. Okay, let's switch gears. We're now shifting our focus from the thyroid to two other incredibly important hormones, both regulated by the pituitary gland: cortisol, which comes from the adrenal cortex, and prolactin from the anterior pituitary itself. First up, cortisol. You've probably heard it called the body's primary stress hormone, and it is, but it's also so much more. It's a type of steroid hormone called a glucocorticoid, and it's secreted by the adrenal cortex. Its effects are incredibly widespread. It's a key regulator of metabolism, it orchestrates our stress response, and it's a powerful modulator of the immune system. And it's always important to remember where it comes from. Like all steroid hormones, cortisol is made from cholesterol. And hey, does this look familiar? It should. Just like the thyroid, cortisol is governed by a similar, elegant, three-tiered system, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, or HPA axis. The hypothalamus releases CRH, or corticotropin-releasing hormone. This tells the pituitary to secrete ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. ACTH then travels down to the adrenal cortex and stimulates the release of cortisol. And just like before, that negative feedback loop is absolutely mission critical. As cortisol levels rise, they signal the hypothalamus and pituitary to back off, suppressing CRH and ACTH to maintain that perfect balance. Next, we've got prolactin. It's also secreted by the anterior pituitary, and its most famous job is stimulating milk production or lactation. But it also has important effects on our reproductive and immune functions. Now, what's really unique about prolactin, and this is so crucial for understanding its pathology, is that its release is primarily under tonic inhibition. The hypothalamus is constantly releasing dopamine, which acts like a brake, holding back prolactin secretion. So to release prolactin, you don't hit an accelerator. You simply take your foot off the dopamine brake. Okay, this next section is going to broaden our view to a whole group of essential hormones from different but really deeply interconnected systems: the pancreas, the GI tract, and another key player from the adrenal glands. Let's kick it off with cholecystokinin, or CCK. This is a peptide hormone that's released from the small intestine, and it gets triggered specifically when fats and proteins from your meal arrive. Its job is to coordinate the next big phase of digestion. It sends a signal to the pancreas to secrete its powerful digestive enzymes, and at the same time, it tells the gallbladder to contract, releasing stored bile to help break down all those fats. Now, let's talk about the pancreas, an absolute powerhouse of metabolic regulation. It secretes three crucial hormones that are always in this delicate dance with each other. You've got insulin, which lowers blood glucose by helping cells take it in for energy. Then you have glucagon, which does the exact opposite. It raises blood glucose by telling the liver to release its stored-up supply. And then there's somatostatin, which kind of acts like a local referee, inhibiting the release of both insulin and glucagon, as well as some other GI hormones, to fine-tune energy balance with incredible precision. So let's head back to the adrenal cortex for a minute to talk about aldosterone, the body's main mineralocorticoid. Its biggest job is managing blood pressure and our electrolyte balance. It acts on the kidneys, telling them to pull sodium and water back into the bloodstream, while at the same time promoting the excretion of potassium. Its release is mostly controlled by the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, or RAAS, which kicks into high gear when blood pressure gets low. It's also directly stimulated by high levels of potassium in the blood. ACTH, it plays only a really minor temporary role here. Okay, so now that we've really established the normal physiology of cortisol and the HPA axis, let's dig into the pathologies that pop up when that system goes haywire. This leads to states of either profound excess or truly life-threatening deficiency. So the most important thing to get here is that these two conditions, Cushing's syndrome and adrenal insufficiency, are metabolic opposites. Total opposites. Cushing's is all about chronic excess cortisol, which pushes the body into this state of breaking things down. It increases glucose production and protein breakdown. Adrenal insufficiency is defined by a dangerous lack of cortisol, which leads to a severely impaired ability to handle any kind of stress. And this is reflected perfectly in how they present. Cushing's with that central obesity and hypertension, and adrenal insufficiency with hypotension and weight loss. Let's look a little closer at Cushing's syndrome. The pathophysiology flows directly from the exaggerated effects of way too much cortisol. It drives up blood sugar, it breaks down muscle protein, causing weakness, and it causes this really characteristic redistribution of fat. This gives us those classic clinical signs: central obesity with skinny arms and legs, a rounded moon face, a fat pad on the upper back called a buffalo hump, along with hypertension, hyperglycemia, and fragile, thin skin that bruises super easily. Diagnosing it is all about proving this cortisol excess, using tests like a 24-hour urinary-free cortisol, measuring cortisol in the saliva late at night, or doing dexamethasone suppression tests to see if that feedback loop is broken. In stark contrast, adrenal insufficiency is a state of cortisol deficiency. This leads to an impaired stress response, chronic low blood pressure, and, if aldosterone is also missing, some major electrolyte problems. The presentation includes just debilitating fatigue, hypotension, and weight loss. Now, in primary adrenal insufficiency, or Addison's disease, where the adrenal gland itself has failed, you see this unique darkening of the skin, or hyperpigmentation. That happens because the pituitary is just screaming out massive amounts of ACTH to try to stimulate the dead adrenal, and a precursor molecule to ACTH also stimulates melanin production. Key lab findings are low sodium and high potassium. The diagnosis gets confirmed with a low morning cortisol level and an ACTH stimulation test, which is a direct challenge to the adrenal gland to see if it can even respond.
All right, we are on the home stretch. In our final section, we're going to tackle two distinct hyper states, where too much of a hormone causes a really unique clinical syndrome. First up, an excess of prolactin, a condition we call hyperprolactinemia. And second, an excess of aldosterone, known as hyperaldosteronism. Let's break down hyperprolactinemia. The most common causes are either a prolactin-secreting pituitary tumor, that's a prolactinoma, or certain medications that block dopamine. They block that crucial inhibitory brake we talked about. The pathophysiology is a direct result of this. When that dopamine inhibition is lost, the pituitary just secretes prolactin with no checks and balances at all. This leads to the classic clinical features: galactorrhea, which is milk discharge that's not related to pregnancy, menstrual irregularities and infertility in women, and hypogonadism in men. The diagnosis, luckily, is refreshingly straightforward. It's a simple blood test for the serum prolactin level. And finally, let's touch on hyperaldosteronism. This is a state of excess aldosterone, usually caused by a small tumor on the adrenal gland or just overgrowth of the glands. The pathophysiology follows directly from aldosterone's main job, just pushed into overdrive. Too much aldosterone makes the body hold on to excess sodium and water, which directly leads to hypertension, and at the same time, it forces the kidneys to waste potassium, resulting in hypokalemia. Clinically, this can show up as high blood pressure that's really tough to control, muscle weakness, and fatigue. Diagnosis often starts with checking an aldosterone to renin ratio. And that brings us to our final big picture thought. We've seen it over and over again with the thyroid's HPT axis, cortisol's HPA axis, prolactin's dopamine brake, and aldosterone's RAS. All of these incredibly powerful systems rely on these elegant, precise feedback loops to stay in balance. So the question I'll leave you with is this. Given how interconnected everything really is, what are the true, cascading systemic consequences when even just a single one of these hormones escapes its regulation?